about to overload.
What is up, guys? You are listening to Planetary Overload. It's going to be a little bit different today. What do you think, Cole?
It's going to be very interesting. We've finally figured out how we might be able to remotely record a podcast, being in two very different places across town.
Yep, and we had to wait on some technology things, and it's just been a drag. But it's all in the name of social distancing and staying safe. If you don't know what's going on, you live underneath a rock. Just saying. Obviously, we have the COVID-19 outbreak, which is being pretty troublesome to a lot of people right now. And we're doing the smart thing, the safe thing, and staying home, making sure we're not spreading disease, and we're working from home. How's working from home been for you, Cole?
I think it's been pretty good so far. A little difficult getting into that routine everyone's been talking about, but that gives us more time to do a bunch of research for you guys about different hobbies, and maybe we'll do some hobbies about what you can do from home.
Yes, I think this first hobby that we're going to be doing from our new format will be pretty good. You know, you mentioned new routines. You know what I've been doing every morning? I've been doing push-ups to get swole, like our hobby today. We've got to get swole for this hobby.
Oh my gosh. Yes, working out. That's been a big thing that everyone has said. You should be working out.
Tell us a bit about how we're going to be formatting the show today, though.
All right. So the format, the new one we're going to try out is we're going to go into this completely blind. We know the topic, and that's it. We're going to go and tell you guys what we know of the topic. Then we're going to go and do some research. We're going to come back with an interview with a guest expert. And then we're going to discuss a little bit about what we talked about with the interviewee, and then our final thoughts.
How we used to do the show for our previous episodes, we used to research a lot beforehand. We had a whole document of information and fun facts, but it kind of defeated the purpose of discovering new hobbies. So our expert today is the person who suggested this new going in blind technique. So how about we get into the hobby? We're getting swole. We're going to be screaming and ripping off shirts and hitting people with chairs. It's wrestling time. Let's get ready to rumble. Gotta get them gains.
Wrestling is such an interesting thing to me, honestly. You just fight each other, but don't actually fight each other because it's not real, ?
It's semi-real. I had a friend my freshman year of college, who was a trainee to be a pro wrestler and is right now a pro wrestler. And she actually choked me out once.
Really?
Yeah. What happened was I used to do Greco wrestling. You know, the one that you see like high schoolers and middle schoolers do. The one with the unitards, and it looks ridiculous.
Yeah. The outfits.
the wonderful outfits. So when I heard that she did wrestling, I'm like, hey, I used to do wrestling in junior high and high school. Do you want to go around? And I did not realize she meant like WWE professional wrestling type stuff. And when I went in for one of my moves, she just like grappled around me like a monkey and just started to choke me out. I was just like, wait, what is going on? I'm so confused. And then I almost passed out.
Oh, God. So there is a difference between what we see on TV versus what we actually do in schools, like junior high and high school.
Yes, there is a difference. I'm not sure to the extent, but wrestling, traditional wrestling, I guess you could call, or the Greek style wrestling, is you have a arena. If you go outside of that, you have to restart in the middle. It has been a long time since I've thought about doing that, and I never won a single match. So it tells you how much I knew about that. I'm just not an aggressive person.
That's fair. Do you have to be an aggressive person for wrestling?
Oh my gosh, yes. You have to constantly be going after them is the thing.
I see.
So, but when we're talking about our professional, or in this case, I know Lance really likes to talk about what's it called? Oh my gosh, I forgot the indie wrestling. This is a televised event. It seems like it's scripted for the most part. They fight technically, but they do it to the point where they don't get hurt, like in mixed martial arts or stuff like that. So that's what I can tell from just watching it a little bit and from what I've been told, of course, and what I've learned myself. What do you know about wrestling, just off the top of your head?
I know that WWE is a major wrestling, I guess, show or company that hires wrestlers, I guess, or contracts wrestlers. I know it comes on TV sometimes. I really don't know that much about wrestling. I know there's a lot of showboating, I guess, would be the word that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of bright colored or skin tight outfits, and they're usually really loud
and very strong. They have muscles. They do the steroids. I mean, I shouldn't accuse of anybody of doing that. They probably just work out really well. I'm sure you've all heard this sound effect before.
And his name is John C.
Yep. Or
my nephew is obsessed with that.
or the guy who says, "Brother, check it. Look at me, brother." Hulk Hogan. These really turned into big pop icons, which I think that's the point.
Oh, The Rock was a wrestler.
Yes, he was.
I enjoy his acting.
I wonder what his wrestling was like. That is definitely a good question to ask our guest today. How was the Rock at wrestling?
Well, it's a big name that many people recognize now. So, I mean, outside of the wrestling sphere,
It's true. Was he a football player, or was that just a movie he was in?
That was a movie.
Okay. You think I would know this?
The game plan.
You think I would know this with my dad being a football player? Anyways, I think the next part in our show, we should be looking up stuff. I'm going to look up pro wrestling, on Wikipedia, because that's our favorite website, isn't it?
It's really the most renowned.
All right, so pro wrestling.
It's a completely sound resource, really.
Totally sound. Look at all these citations. I see so many citations. How can you be wrong? These citations couldn't be wrong. I'm not going to look at the citation. Professional wrestling, often shortened to pro wrestling or simply wrestling, is a form of performance art and entertainment that combines athletics with theatrical performance. It takes the form of events held by touring companies that mimic title match combat sports. I would assume that's like boxing or something like that. The unique form of the sport portrayed is fundamentally based on and evolved from classic and catch wrestling with modern additions of striking attacks, strength-based holds and throws, and acrobatic maneuvers. What? Acrobatic?
Well, I mean, they jump off things, right?
I mean...
You know, the rope things that's in the ring.
When I think of acrobatics, I think of like the Cirque du Soleil, where they're like flying across the stage. Maybe they are. I haven't watched much wrestling. Mm-hmm. Much of these derive from the influence of various international martial arts. An additional aspect of combat with improvised weaponry is sometimes included. Chairs! All hail the chairs! The match has predetermined outcomes. Oh! To heighten entertainment value. So it's rigged?
Yes.
That's what that says.
I guess.
Okay. That's another question for our experts. Wow. I don't know how much I would feel about enjoying that if I knew that it was predetermined. But, I mean, at the end, we don't know who's going to win, so...
Yeah, we don't know which one is predetermined. Also, I think it's more, again, I'm going to use the word showboating.
Yeah.
Because the acrobatics of the whole thing.
Yeah, no,
I mean, and I assume they pull their punches, but I could be wrong.
There is no according to Wikipedia, there is no governing authority for professional wrestling rules. Although there is a general standard which has been developed, each promotion has its own variation, but are all similar enough to avoid confusion most of the time. Any rule described here is simply a standard. Wow. So that would make it interesting though, because if you didn't like one company, you could go to another company and check out how they do things. So that would be pretty fun. Yeah.
So maybe wrestling is a very fluid type thing.
What do you mean?
Or hobby. Like it just depends on where you're going to watch it or to do it.
Huh.
Like which company.
Okay.
Different rules means you perform differently, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Pyrotechnics. Other dramatic elements of a rain entrance can include. So, you know how I just played that John Cena thing? That was a rain entrance.
Yeah.
So, it includes pyrotechnics, additional visual graphics, a distinct sound or opening note. Do 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 do. Darkening of the arena. Entering in a manner keeping with character traits such as fast, highly energetic interest or slow, stoic interest. For example, the Ultimate Warrior would run at high speed during the entrance ramp and into the ring, while Randy Orton would slowly and darkly walk to the ring. The Undertaker has adopted one of the most notable entrances, taking about 4 to 5 minutes, darkening the whole arena. Jeez.
That's a long time to walk down a little aisle, man.
I mean, I bet it would look and
really cool.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the point.
So each wrestler has their own character and thus performs as the character might and enters as the character might.
Yeah. So people also ask on Google, when did pro wrestling become fake?
Oh. Well, I think there's a difference between boxing and wrestling, though.
Oh, for sure. Like, I mean, I've definitely seen videos that Lance have showed me where, like, they were actually bleeding because this guy was actually slapping them on the chest really hard and knocking them to the ground. So, very interesting thing. So, I think let's look at the biggest wrestling companies. And then we'll look at indie wrestling too. All right. So the biggest wrestling promotion. Okay, I guess they're not called countries. I guess they're called promotions. WWE. I mean, of course. New Japan Pro Wrestling. That's something. Consejo Mundial de Luchadora. Okay. Dragon Gate, that sounds cool. And then AAA Insurance.
That's where I went too, so I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Oh my gosh. Does AAA Insurance have pro wrestling? Or is it just
No.
AAA wrestling?
It's gotta be different.
Okay. Lucha Libre AAA Worldwide. Oh, okay. No, it's not the same as the...
Okay, thank you.
That would have been cool.
It would have been weird.
I think it would have been amazing. I don't know what you're talking about.
All right, so we really don't have much of a basic knowledge of... Well, we have a base knowledge of wrestling, but definitely not as far as it actually goes.
Yeah, I definitely think we'll have to listen to our expert, and then we'll talk more about it afterwards. So we're back here with Lance McFarlane, our resident expert on wrestling, specifically pro wrestling, because we had to learn the difference between regular wrestling and pro wrestling, because there is a difference. And Lance, just take a second to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Lance McFarlane. I'm the general manager here at the radio station where this podcast is produced out of. And, during these strange times where we don't have as much access to guests and things, we've decided to go with some things that I know about. Next might be comic books, board games, juggling, Lego. We can do it all. So, yeah, there's a lot of things we can do, when you're having to use internal experts. So I have had many years of watching pro wrestling with a few gaps in there, but I am a diehard pro wrestling fan, so I'm here to answer anything you want to know.
So I guess I'll start off with my first question that I wrote down while we were kind of looking at things earlier. we had a discussion because obviously we're at home. You're at the studio right now, but you're keeping the business up and running, and most of us are at home. What's going on in wrestling right now? Are they still? It's really contact heavy, so there's a potential that a lot of disease could probably spread throughout the ranks of pro wrestlers. But are they still going? Is this something that people can watch right now?
Yeah, so this is a strange time in wrestling, and it's a really interesting time to record this episode because wrestling is so weird right now. But as the NBA and the NHL and Major League Soccer all come to a grinding halt, the carnival sideshow of professional wrestling marches on. So wrestling right now, we'll go with WWE, which is the company that most people probably know about. Mm-hmm. They're recording their show every week live. Some of the matches are pre-taped from their performance center. It's just like essentially a big warehouse. No audience. It's very strange. You've probably seen the meme crazy. Of somebody of Stone Cold saying, "Give me a hell yeah," that like weird thing that happened a couple of weeks ago. WWE is weird. There's other companies like AEW that are handling it really well. No audience, but they're bringing a few of their wrestlers to sit in the front row, a few of their more loudmouth wrestlers that can just yell the whole time, and they're putting on some pretty good matches right now.
I found it really interesting that it's still going on because what I know, which is very little, is that it's a very audience-based thing.
It is,
with audience interaction, a lot like comedy and like comedians. They go a lot from the audience and audience response. So.
Oh yeah, wrestling is that one sport or sport entertainment that the audience is fully involved in. Like some of the greatest moments in all of wrestling history are when the audience was at its best. An audience can make or break a show in a lot of ways, but during these times when there is no audience to be had, they're doing their best. WWE not doing quite as good of a job as a company like AEW. In Japan, I watch a lot of Japanese wrestling. They just put shows on hold for good, and now that things are calming down a little there, they're starting to get back to doing shows with audiences while taking their temperatures at the door and things like that. I think it'll be really interesting to listen back on episodes like this in 5 years and just go like, just little pieces of what the world was like right now. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it will be kind of like a historical landmark that people might study, right?
Yeah, like a time capsule. Yeah. One last thing on that is that WrestleMania, which is WWE's premier event every year, I went to WrestleMania when there were 103,000 people in the crowd at the AT&T Center. So it's their biggest event, 60 to 100,000 people every year. And every company in the world does shows from the city that WrestleMania is in every year. And it's a huge chunk of their annual revenue that weekend. So this year, WWE is doing WrestleMania from the Performance Center. They actually shot all the matches last week, and those matches will be airing this weekend as a fully produced show. But WrestleMania in front of no audience, it's some huge, big deal matches in front of nobody, and then all of the smaller companies, the indie promotions that won't be making their biggest part of their annual income this year.
Jeez.
That's going to be a really big hit.
It's a strange time for almost everybody right now. You keep on mentioning different promotion names and stuff. Can you tell us about choosing a promotion to follow? Is it better to just follow as many as you can? Or I know you've told me in the past just to pick a favorite fighter and just go from there. Can you tell us a bit about the different promotions and how they react? Because I know there's no like set rule of wrestling. It's not like football where around the world, or football if you want to, soccer, where it's all the same. Each promotion has
where you
different...
just follow the team from your city or
right.
Wrestling is you've got a lot of options, right? Like you said, just like in comic books, I tend to follow writers. I love a certain writer, so I read every book they do, even if it's a character I don't particularly care for. You could love a wrestler like Kenny Omega, right? And he was in a company called New Japan, so you're watching New Japan. He leaves and goes to a company called AEW, so you follow him to AEW. I don't tend to be that. People who are really into wrestling tend to watch a lot of wrestling. But if you're just getting into wrestling, I think there would be a few things to think about. Are you wanting to, what style of wrestling would you like to watch? Are you wanting more family entertainment? Are you wanting to watch with your kids? Then WWE might be a good option. It's the most accessible. It's the most easy to get into, the easiest to swallow, so it is it's not as good of wrestling in my opinion. It's not as hard hitting of wrestling. It's not as athletic. They're great wrestlers in their company, but they all wrestle a certain style. But for family value, family entertainment, WWE is pretty good. A new company called AEW, which is something that spun out of a lot of different things and is now live every week on TNT every Wednesday night. So the day we're recording this, it'll be live in a really weird way. It's funded by the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And he's just a big wrestling fan since he was a kid. So he met all these indie wrestlers and they started this big company that kind of spun out of New Japan Pro Wrestling and spun out of this YouTube series. And it's a kind of a weird thing that happened, but it's created this company that's doing pretty good. And it is, I would say, the new version of good family entertainment wrestling. Oh. It's a little edgy. It's kind of like more WWE was in the 90s. But still, I would say a good show to sit down and watch with your kids. There might be a slightly more cursing than you're going to get in WWE, but the wrestling is going to be better. The characters are going to be better. The storylines are going to be less goofy. I stopped watching WWE about a year ago. It just got to the point where it wasn't enjoyable for me, but still has a lot of value. If you are wanting something that is just more hard-hitting, more athletic, you could go with something like NXT. NXT is kind of like the minor leagues of WWE. It's their training ground, but they have a weekly show. It's on the WWE network. Oh, actually, it airs live on USA every Wednesday. I forgot it started being live now. So NXT every Wednesday night on USA is a great show. I mean, it's a product of WWE. It is leagues better than the main WWE shows. And then every time a wrestler leaves and goes to the main roster, you're just sad because you like NXT so much more, But then, for me, New Japan is my favorite wrestling. Japanese wrestling, that's not as accessible, right? You've got to go to this strange Japanese website, hit the translate button, figure out how to put in your credit card information and pay $9 a month to watch Japanese wrestling. They have English commentary on almost every show. It's just not as accessible for trying to get into it.
How did you start getting into wrestling, though? How did this come about?
So I started watching wrestling in the 90s when wrestling was at its absolute height of popularity. There was something called the Monday Night Wars, where WWF, which was what WWE was at the time, until the World Wildlife Fund sued them over the letters WWF.
Okay. Wow.
And that's when they became World Wrestling Entertainment instead of the World Wrestling Federation. So them and WCW each had a show on Monday night, and they were the two biggest wrestling shows. It was the most profitable time for wrestling because wrestlers could go to either company and get bigger and bigger paychecks, and it was the most innovative time because they really had to innovate to get viewers to their show. And wrestling was just very popular. I mean, every kid wore wrestling shirts every day to school. Degeneration X, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Undertaker. This is the height of all the Rock,
yes.
Dwayne The Rock Johnson. This is the height of all those classic wrestlers. So I was obviously going to watch wrestling. I would say I started a little before that by renting random videotapes from the movie store.
That's always a dangerous game.
Yeah, and I didn't know. It took me a while to realize that this was a thing that you could just watch on TV every week. I had no idea. I thought they were just, you watched them out of order from the movie store, And, I took a long break from about 2000 to about 2015. I watched a company in the middle there called TNA. And, but then I got very heavily back into wrestling because my nephew had tickets to a wrestling show, and his dad decided he didn't want to go. And I thought, I used to love wrestling, and we went to Austin to watch WWE Monday Night Raw, and I was just done then. Like, it's been part of my life ever since. So
It grabbed you back.
yeah.
So does it ever kind of hamper the mood that you know that matches will generally be rigged, or it's like already scripted out? Because that was a little bit weird to us,
Yeah.
going from
Yeah.
regular sports to knowing, oh, the person who wins is already known by somebody.
I think the first thing you want to think about there is that the person who wins is not already known to you.
Oh, that's true.
Right. So if you hear this a lot as a wrestling fan, right? The word fake is a bad word in wrestling. Predetermined is what people like to use, but it's just not a big deal. If you like it, you like it. To me, it's like watching a soap opera. Like,
Oh my gosh.
like it's just entertainment, right? Think about it this way. You're essentially watching a soap opera with stunt men and stunt women who are able to do a 10, 20, 30, sometimes even an hour long, fully produced stunt in one take.
Okay, that's pretty
That's
cool.
that takes a lot of talent.
That's impressive.
Now, do they still get hurt? I know it's like scripted
Wrestling
and
is
stuff.
predetermined, but wrestling is painful. Wrestling is very, very painful to wrestlers. I've never jumped from 4 feet in the air and landed on my back, but I imagine it hurts.
Yeah.
They're landing on a very thin piece of canvas that is on top of wooden slats.
Oh.
That's on top of a metal frame.
Yikes.
It just has to hurt. There's no way it doesn't hurt.
Right.
And yeah, wrestlers they get injured for sure. One last thing on that last topic is I want you to think about this. This is a really interesting thing. There's 3 things in the world that are always in the second act. We talked about soap operas.
Right.
There's wrestling, and there's comic books. Those are like the 3 forms of entertainment that are fully second act versions of entertainment. They're always ongoing second act stories. Like, there's never any full resolution. There's never any full amount of build-up. Stories never end. It's just ever ongoing,
It's endless
So,
arcs.
yeah. So as far as injuries go, wrestlers definitely get injured. I mean, there's some famous injuries. There's Owen Hart falling from the rafters because he was going to come down on a line into the ring, and he fell from the rafters and died when he hit the ring post.
Wow.
There's been plenty of wrestlers who have passed away in the ring, been injured. Stone Cold Steve Austin famously had his neck broken in a match, actually by Owen Hart. In Japan, they do this style of wrestling called strong style wrestling. So it's very, very hard hitting, and it's a lot of drops onto your neck, right? So there's a wrestler, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but this was back in the 90s, I believe, who just from a very simple move just died in the ring, and they found out that he had been internally decapitated.
Oh my
Like, his neck had taken so much damage that it essentially crumbled.
Jeez.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
So wrestling is a very dangerous sport. I mean, you could put sport in quotes, but there's a lot of people who go from like UFC to wrestling or the NFL to wrestling, and most of them would say that wrestling is a lot more athletic endeavor than any of those other sports.
Jeez.
So
But it's not real fighting. That's the only thing. It's just not real fighting.
So it's kind of a mix of athleticism, of what you would think of sports, and then almost the theatricality of a play.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Is that why
And
so
then-
many wrestlers tend to go into acting after they're done with their wrestling career?
Yeah, a lot of wrestlers do go into acting, especially coming out of a company like WWE. I mean, part of their training in WWE is they have a acting coach on staff who
Wow.
is just there to, because a big part of wrestling is something called a promo. A promo is when a wrestler is talking. When they're not having a wrestling match, but they're just talking. They're doing an interview, or it's called cutting a promo. So when a wrestler's cutting a promo, they need to be able to act. They need to be able to engage and connect and have the audience react to them and have you at home react to them. And, it's, acting is a big part of it.
I guess that's why The Rock is so popular now.
Yeah.
He's in like every film now that you see a trailer for.
You know, WWE went so far with it that they said, like, hey, we're training all of our wrestlers to be actors. So they started WWE Studios, and they produced their own movies, and they just use their wrestlers as the actors.
Really?
They're very bad straight-to-DVD movies, but it's like another way for them to train their wrestlers to be actors, you know?
Fascinating.
Wow.
Yeah.
So going back to, we mentioned rules a bit earlier, but are there for sure don'ts in the wrestling world?
So are we saying, so there's a term in wrestling called kayfabe, and kayfabe is the story. Kayfabe is if I'm fully buying in and I'm worried about who's winning this fight, I'm buying into the kayfabe element. If you're talking about the reality, it's called a shoot. If you're saying, like, who was the shoot winner of this? Like, who did we know was going to win because of whatever factor? So if we're talking about the kayfabe rules, like the rules of, like, the wrestling match.
Yes, that's
So,
what I mean.
yeah, there's a lot of rules. You know, obviously a bell rings. You know, what happens between the bells. So a bell rings to start it and a bell rings to finish it, right? A 1, 2, 3, a pin is how you win, right? And or tapping to a submission. So just like in UFC, or like similar to like freestyle wrestling or Greco-Roman wrestling, tapping to a submission. But all the rules in the middle are, you know, like if your opponent's in the ropes, you have 5 seconds to get off of them, similar to boxing, right? If you're on the outside of the ring, you get a 10 count to get back into the ring. So, yeah, there's a lot of rules. In places like Japan, you're not allowed to hit with a closed fist. So, like, even though it's not real, if a wrestler is hitting with a closed fist and the referee is admonishing them, that's like a planned thing. Right? So you're saying the referee is, like, getting onto this guy, but, like, the referee and the guy are in on it. Like, you did it on purpose to get in trouble, to create drama.
Okay.
You know? And I would say most wrestling isn't, like, planned from the beginning. Like, the wrestlers, for the most part, don't sit in the back and say, here's exactly what's going to happen in our match.
Okay, so it's not like
a lot of
blocked
wrestlers
out.
will go over. Yeah, a lot of wrestlers will go over some beats that are going to happen throughout the match, but some wrestlers don't. Like, wrestlers are very good at getting into a ring, communicating with each other as the match goes, and making the match happen flawlessly.
So they're really good improvers.
100%. And one really good thing to think about is that a wrestler from Japan and a wrestler from Mexico that do not speak each other's languages can have a fully flawless wrestling match
No.
without ever
That's
having spoken to
incredible.
each other before the match, except to say who's going to be the winner.
That is so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really impressive. I mean, there's secrets that you have to learn in wrestling school, and when you start wrestling, that, like, I don't even know. Like, there's a way that things are done, you know? Like, how do you kick somebody in the face and make it sound like you kicked them in the face without kicking them? Well, wrestlers slap their legs when they kick. You don't see it because your eyes are focused on the kick, but they slap their leg and it sounds like they kicked them, you know?
Wow.
If you really kick someone, it wouldn't make a noise like that. But when you're watching wrestling, you're like, yeah, of course that's how kicks sound, right? They sound like slaps.
Wow.
Yeah.
So do people have to know all of these things before they start watching or participating in this hobby?
I would say wrestling is the easiest sport-like thing to get into because it's just, at its heart, is entertaining. If you start to watch basketball or you start to watch hockey, it's not going to be very long before you want to really know some rules for it to be more interesting. Like with basketball, you want to get to the point where you're watching the ball more than you're watching the players, right?
Right.
With hockey, like, you just have to get good at watching the puck, right? And, like, you really want to know the rules and know what's happening, or it's really confusing. With wrestling, there's just so much entertainment and so much athleticism that, like, it'll become clear pretty quick what the, like, simple rules are, and it's just watchable from the start.
It kind of takes that childlike wrestling when you were turning it into what you always thought it would be.
Yeah, yeah, and when you're watching wrestling, there's this whole other side of wrestling that is being a wrestler, right? We're talking about watching wrestling, and when you're watching wrestling, it's just pure entertainment. You start a match, or you come into the middle of a match, and you watch them act towards the crowd. You watch them do flips off the rope, and it's just impressive. And I would say, more than knowing rules going in, you're gonna be more interested in knowing storylines. You're gonna want to know why these two guys don't like each other. That's gonna be more. That's gonna help you get into the matches a lot more than rules.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm not saying you want to go look up storylines, because wrestling is really good at telling you storylines over and over and over again. Like with video packages before matches, things like that. But, normally I would say a show like WrestleMania is a good show to watch. Like, WrestleMania is kind of the end of the season, and then the next night on Monday Night Raw is kind of the beginning of the next season. Like, they end a lot of storylines at WrestleMania.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
From a financial perspective, does this cost a lot of money to get into? I know there's pay-per-view that happens with some things, and obviously you need cable, but a lot of us already have cable. I do not, but
yeah. So when I was a kid and you wanted to watch wrestling, you have cable, right? So you can watch the weekly product. But if any real wrestling fan wants to watch the pay-per-views, right? So pay-per-views cost $30 a month. You would buy a WWF pay-per-view, a WCW pay-per-view, and then pay $20 if you were really into ECW, which was like the extreme wrestling back in the day. Now there's something called the WWE Network, where you pay $10 a month and you get a streaming service that not only has every pay-per-view ever on it, but every new pay-per-view streams live, and every NXT pay-per-view, and every NXT UK pay-per-view, and every tournament they do, and every documentary they put out. It is probably the best value streaming service there is. I don't even watch WWE anymore, and I still pay for WWE Network every month, just in case there's something I want to check out or to watch NXT. For things like New Japan, they have their own streaming service. There's streaming services like High Spots Wrestling Network, which gives you access to like a bunch of independent wrestling companies if you wanted to watch more independent wrestling. And then there's, companies like Ring of Honor, which is on television every week, but you still have to pay those old pay-per-view prices if you want to watch their pay-per-views. They don't have a streaming service like other companies have. So, yeah, it just kind of depends. I would say to get into WWE, as long as you have cable, you would be good to start watching WWE. If you have Hulu, the weekly WWE shows are on Hulu. For AEW, which I would say would be my best recommendation for someone who wanted to check out wrestling, because it's very new, so all the stories are new. There's some big names from WWE who are there, like Chris Jericho and Dean Ambrose, so people would maybe know them from just like popular culture. AEW is, if you didn't have TNT, is a little challenging to watch. They have a weekly show that's on YouTube called AEW Dark, so maybe that would be a good initial look into it. I would say to check out wrestling, the best thing would be to just go watch some classic wrestling matches. Just see if you like it. And then if it's something you're interested in, then you could worry about how you get into the weekly product,
Oh,
how would someone find those classic wrestling matches? They just look them up?
Yeah, I mean, YouTube, obviously. And, there are wrestling streaming sites out there that are, for anyone familiar with anime, there's a website called Kiss Anime, which is like, it's not what you might call illegal, but it's probably not super kosher.
It's gray. It's gray.
Yeah. So there are things called Watch Wrestling out there, watchwrestling.something. And, those are places you can watch weekly live shows if you don't have cable, right? YouTube, great. I mean, we could give a few match recommendations that I think would make people, like matches that you would go, I don't like wrestling, or I'm now going to try and watch wrestling, Okay. But, yeah, a lot of matches are on YouTube. Wrestling is not free other than that. If it's on YouTube or a streaming service or cable TV, right? So
Cool.
Okay.
So thank you so much for coming on to the show, Lance.
yeah, if I can have one last word, I would like to give maybe a match or two that people should go check out.
For sure.
All right, go for
How
it.
about that?
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
If you want to check out a couple of matches, my favorite wrestling match of all time, one of the highest rated wrestling matches of all time, is Kenny Omega. So pretty easy to spell, Kenny Omega. And we'll see if this is on YouTube. And Kenny Omega versus a Japanese wrestler named Kazuchika Okada. So
A little harder to spell.
that name is Kazuchika, Kazuchika, and then Okada, Kazuchika Okada. So this is like a world championship match in New Japan Pro Wrestling. Took place at their version of WrestleMania called Wrestle Kingdom, and it was the first ever 6-star rated match. You know, there's a guy named Dave Meltzer who's been giving ratings since the 70s, and it was the first match he ever rated a 6-star. He went out of his 5-star system. And more recently, there's a tag team match that happened in AEW between the Young Bucks. I don't know if you've heard the name the Young Bucks. There was a big video on the internet a few years ago called Super Kick Party, where they brought a little kid in the ring on his birthday and they super kicked him. That was like big on the internet a few years ago. But, you know, they started in Ring of Honor in New Japan, and them along with Cody Rhodes and Kenny Omega are like the vice presidents of AEW. Like they started the company. So the Young Bucks versus Kenny Omega and Hangman Adam Page. Those two matches will tell you like if you're going to enjoy the athleticism of wrestling.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And one quick note is, Cody Rhodes, the person who is one of the owners and operators of AEW, is the son of Dusty Rhodes, classic wrestler Dusty Rhodes. And do you guys want to know what university Dusty Rhodes went to and got kicked out of and
I
played
can
football
take a guess.
Tarleton State University.
Did he really? Wow.
Yeah. And also West Texas A&M, right? A lot of wrestlers went to West Texas A&M. But yeah, there's a lot more you can get into with the history of wrestling. And but I would say for someone trying to get into the hobby, watch a couple of matches. Those are some good ones. You could look up a couple of classic WWE matches if you wanted to. But I would say modern wrestling is much more enjoyable than older wrestling for me personally. It's much more athletic. The storylines aren't as like pervasive, and they're not as like hokey. And I would say modern wrestling, your Kenny Omegas, your Young Bucks, Darby Allin is a great young wrestler. There's tons of great wrestlers out there. And then, before you know it, you'll be watching independent wrestling. Pro Wrestling Guerrilla is a good one out of California. Austin, there's a company called Wrestle Circus. That's a really good company. I actually went to a wrestling show in my hometown of Hamilton. If you're in the Stephenville area, you know how tiny Hamilton is, and saw Jerry the King Lawler. I mean, that's like a super famous name in wrestling,
Cool.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, I appreciate you guys having me on.
Of course. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'll be back for the board game episode.
Yes, you will. Yes, you will. If not an interview guest, a guest.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for Lance McFarland for coming onto the show and talking to us about wrestling. I have to say that was a really fascinating interview. I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Oh, yeah, it definitely was. I feel like he was a very good guest to have on the show. He just had so much knowledge coming back at us.
I didn't know that wrestling had like a peak in the 90s. I was unaware of that. I knew that like the 90s was the time of grunge and edginess. That was the word I was looking for.
Yes.
Modern edginess is cringy, but maybe it was just cringy back then too.
Yeah, I looked up some highlights from WWF/WWE.
Yeah.
And it was definitely the older stuff that I was a bit more interested in.
Really?
I watched on YouTube. I watched a highlights little clip from the 2020 so far. Mm-hmm. And I gotta say, it was slower and a bit more boring to me.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not sure I like the modern stuff. with the
Well,
older clips I liked.
You're probably gonna enjoy the New Japan Wrestling because it sounds like they kept that fast pacedness, but also that narrative story. Because WWE is purposely slower and less because it's meant for families. I would assume.
Right. I think that's what Lance had mentioned.
The thing that really got me is it kind of reminds me of that play fighting that you used to do as a kid with your siblings or other friends, and just like that idea that it's about to be brought to life, except with muscular people. And I mean muscular people.
Yeah, they're just huge. I can definitely see that aspect in it. I think though where you get like pillows when you're a kid, like, oh yeah, I'm gonna jump off the couch, belly flop onto this huge pillow. You're actually belly flopping onto like boards and metal.
It makes it so much hardcore.
There was a clip that I saw where they actually body slammed into a flaming table.
What?
A flaming table.
Jeez.
Yep.
I was looking at some of the promos of just the guys talking. It was just like, I could get behind this. And then it showed like him talking, and then it would go to clips of the guy punching another guy in the face. I was just like, oh yes.
So would you recommend wrestling then?
I think it takes a right personality. Like, if you, it's like suggesting heavy metal to somebody who likes rock. I mean, sometimes they'll like it, sometimes they won't. And it's very violent, and some people, I know a lot of people who are maybe a little bit more chill than that, but
yeah,
you never know. I would watch it. I'm thinking about getting the WWE Pass or one of the other passes to some of the streaming websites.
Personally, I'm not sure I would pay money for it just because it's not something I'm interested in. But it's a sport that has a lot of theatricality, and I do like that, and I think that's very dynamic in that way.
I think the athleticism is what does it for me.
Yeah.
I grew up in a very athletic family. I mean, I played football since I was in first grade, and my brother played football for most of his life. My dad was an NFL player, so I can definitely appreciate like that sort of athleticism, and it's impressive. Like, super
definitely
impressive.
It is very impressive for these people, wrestlers, pro wrestlers, to be able to have that athleticism and the art of talking to people and hyping up the crowd.
And endurance to just last that long with all
Right.
the
Hours,
stuff that they're doing.
Yeah.
Oh, props to them. If in any way we felt like we were dogging on pro wrestlers, we weren't, because that is a tough job. But
Yes,
sounds
definitely.
like they're very good at it.
Yes.
So normally we have a section where we talk about going out and doing things, but at the time of the podcast release, you don't want to go out and do things, or you shouldn't. So
Right. With the stay-at-home orders, at least across our state, why not try wrestling? It's something you can watch at home, and you don't have to go out anywhere.
And by why not try wrestling, we mean watch wrestling.
Yes.
Don't go out and wrestle people, please.
I mean, I guess unless you guys have consent and you're like, but maybe do it 6 feet away.
Did you just say wrestle from 6 feet away?
Yeah, you could just like air wrestle, right?
Oh my god.
Like air hugs.
So, speaking on that, for the next couple episodes, we will be just doing things that you can do at home, that you could order online, and that you can find online. So, for this one, just search up wrestling streaming. You'll find something. Trust me.
Yes, and I mean, I assume you've listened to the interview section, and that's where Lance gave us some good where to start when you're talking about like the companies.
Yeah.
Like WWE, I think it's AWE is another one he recommended.
Mm-hmm. And then obviously New Japan Wrestling.
Right. So just look up those, or if you already know of a pro wrestler that you might like, search them up, find out what company they're with, and watch some of that.
Yeah, and then yeah. Yes. So talking about prices, our interviewee also really covered that. I really think that the overall price that you would need to pay is anywhere between $10 to $50. I say 50 if you're like combining services and you're trying to watch a bunch of different ones. Even free if you can swing it right.
Right, definitely. Those streaming services right now are the best.
They're really seeing the struggle on their servers right now, though. But that's what happens when entire countries are shut down forever.
Not forever.
It feels like forever. We haven't even done a month yet, and I feel like it's been forever. Oh, right. So $10, I would say, is the initial buy-in into this. That's not very well. $10 a month. That's not too bad.
No, it's just like really any subscription service. So, I mean, if you pay for Netflix or if you have Hulu, you're pretty much already paying that. And it's not too much. It's spread out over a month, or it's spread out over the year. So $10 a month. Right.
And then if you don't like Hulu, you can like substitute in your budget. Just stop paying for Hulu and get wrestling.
Yes. What we mean to say, it's very accessible for anyone to get this right now.
Yes, So that's it. I want to thank everybody for coming to listen to Planetary Overload. I know it's been a bit of a different one. We're kind of testing some new things out in a very weird time, but we have the perfect opportunity to do it with being at home and stuff. So thank you so much for coming, guys.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye.
This has been a Tarleton Radio Network podcast with production from AJ Heyer and Taylor Welch. Find more great shows by searching Tarleton Radio Network wherever you get your podcasts.